I'm going to be sharing with you how to actually transcend to the fifth dimension. How do you transcend to this thing called the fifth dimension? Because people always use this word, not realizing that the fifth dimension is not some place that you get to one day. It's not that one day you're going to get to the fifth dimension. It's more of a state of consciousness that you get to that actually does already exist in this present moment. So I'm going to get into how to actually get to this state of consciousness and what it means, and also some misconceptions with what the words actually mean, like 3D, 5D, and what all these words mean. So make sure that you stay till the end of the video, because I'm going to go in depth on both of these states of consciousness and how you can actually shift to 5D. So if you're new to this channel, consider hitting that subscribe button and that notification bell, because I post a new video every single day. Also, if you want to become a private client, then consider applying for a free consultation by hitting the website that's in the description box of this video. So what is 3D, first of all? Before I get into 5D, what is 3D? Well, 3D is when you are identified with the mind and the body. You believe that you are the mind and you believe that you are the body, and you haven't yet came to the conclusion that there is something actually there that can simply observe the mind and the body. And so 3D is a very heavy energy. There's a lot of anger associated in this energy field. There's a lot of anxiety, a lot of fear, because you're unconsciously attached to the thoughts. So all that consciousness, all that awareness is actually, without the person realizing it, is all stuck up in the mind, okay? So the mind is actually holding all the consciousness. And so that creates a lot of suffering to some degree, because when the awareness and the focus and the consciousness is unconsciously actually in the mind, it's all this past and future thinking where you're not actually in the present moment. You're not actually giving your body the life force that it needs to just be present, because the body needs life force. And how do you give the body life force? By giving it attention. Just like you give a little baby attention, it's almost like you want to give your body that attention as well. Because if you don't give attention to a baby, what happens? The baby starts crying, the baby starts screaming. And so your body and your state of consciousness is almost the same thing. If all your consciousness is just in the mind, but you neglect other parts of form in your consciousness, including your body, then that creates a very heavy energy. You're not connected to the present moment. And there's a lot of issues that can arise in your life from the 3D state of consciousness. There's a lot of reactivity. There's a lot of patterns that people are attached to in the 3D. And it's just this very heavy energy where you're very attached to the body, very attached to the mind. You're very attached to your own story and your belief systems and who you think you are. And you tend to get into a lot of arguments, and things tend to go not in the way that you want to go when you're in the 3D. So that's the 3D. I'll go a little bit deeper into this. But so what is the 5D? The 5D is when you start to notice that the body and the mind is not actually who or what you are. You have a body, you have a mind, but are these things necessarily who you actually are? Not necessarily, because you start to realize that there's something there. I can't even call it a something, because it's just this emptiness that can observe things, that can observe thoughts, that can observe feelings, can observe emotions. And so what happens as you become this observer is you stop taking your thoughts and your emotions so seriously, because you can simply be the observer of them. And then you can also start to change your belief systems, change your thoughts, and then break the patterns that we've unconsciously been identified with. And so from the 5D, which is just a label, you can start to get into a state of consciousness where things become less heavy, things become less dense, and things become less serious and more fun, because you're not attached to these things that aren't really who you are. Like, your thoughts are not who you are. Your emotions are not actually who you are. No form in reality is who you are. And so what is this whole 3D, 5D thing? Before I continue and I go a little bit further, I just wanted to make it clear that 3D and 5D are just labels, human constructs that we have created to try and put a label on something that cannot actually have a label, okay? I'm trying to put a label on something. We're using these human words to define a state of consciousness. That's all it really is. 3D, 5D is just a state of consciousness. It's a state of awareness. And even the word consciousness can have a lot of stigma attached to that word. Well, what is even consciousness? It's just how aware you really are of things in your life. How aware are you of your thoughts? How aware are you of your emotions, your belief systems, your dogmas, who you think you are? How aware of you are of the personality that you think you are? Like you're a shy person. Maybe you believe that you're a confident person. Maybe you believe you can only make this amount of money per month. And we have these stories, but the thing is, are you conscious of these stories, right? And as you shift more into the 5D, which is a word to represent a state of consciousness where you're not attached to the thoughts, then things become much easier, things become less heavy, and your whole reality begins to shift. Another word that I can use to represent the 3D is the ego. What is the ego? Another way to explain the ego is the unobserved mind, meaning that it's the part of you that is unobserved. So maybe you don't have thoughts that you're conscious of, but just because you're not conscious of those thoughts doesn't mean that those thoughts are still not actually there. You're just not able to be aware of them, but they are still there controlling your experience. Right? These thoughts are still controlling your experience. Just because you don't have conscious awareness of your thoughts doesn't mean that they're still not there. And so that's what identification with the mind actually is. Creating an identity out of your thoughts implies that there's a lack of consciousness of them, because when you become conscious of them as the spacious observer, as the witnessing presence, as Eckhart Tolle calls it sometimes, that's another word, a human label to explain the emptiness, I could call it emptiness, to observe thoughts, you start to see that those thoughts are not who you are. And that is the beginning of disidentification with the mind. Okay? Disidentification with the mind. Meaning that you stop creating an identity around the thoughts. You stop believing that those thoughts are who you actually are, because you are not those thoughts. And the more that you come to this conclusion, I could classify this conclusion as a 5D state of consciousness. Because also what happens when you stop identifying with the mind, your sense of self actually starts to expand. You start to realize that your thoughts is not just who you are, but essentially you are actually one with everything. I know it sounds cliche, I know it sounds sappy, but you literally become one with what you're looking at, because you realize that the limited sense of self that we identify with is not actually who or what you are. And so what can happen is your sense of self will begin to expand, and even your sense perceptions will become more heightened because you'll be more present to the moment. You'll start to be more present. You'll start to be more connected with everything. You'll see that separation is just a result of the limited human construct that we attach to, right? That's what creates the illusion of separation. But when you start to connect deeper to the present moment, you'll literally start to experience a feeling of oneness just being present to the moment. Even when I'm recording this video right now, when I start recording videos, I start to enter a 5D state, you could call it, where I start to feel very one with everything. I start to feel very present to the moment. I start to feel connected to the camera, to the room around me, and I start to vibrate at a higher frequency, you could call it, which is just words that we're using to represent a state of awareness where you feel more present. Essentially, what's happening is that you are just more present to the moment. You're just connected to the here and now. You stop attaching to the past, you stop attaching to the future, and you connect to the nowness of the moment, if that's even a word. But you connect to the nowness of the moment, and you stop taking things so seriously because you're just present with what is. So 3D is identification with the mind, identification with the thoughts. Heavy energy usually implies a lot of anxiety, a lot of fear, a lot of worry. It's a lack state of consciousness. The 3D and the ego believes that there's lack and that things are lacking, not realizing that there is no lack. Lack is a human construct of the mind. That's what the lack really is. Lack is not a real thing. There is only an abundance of everything, including lack, if your consciousness is on that. Because here's the thing, is that our awareness is always somewhere, whether consciously or unconsciously. So if your awareness and your consciousness is unconsciously absorbed in the mind, then what happens is you start to believe in certain things that may not necessarily be true, but you identify with those belief systems, and then you see a reflection of that. How do you really feel rich? How do you remove lack from your life? You enter the 5D. You give your body more attention. You realize that the richness has nothing to do with the amount of money in your bank account, but more to do with the feeling of the 5D, of being present to the moment. That's what you're really after. And so if you're trying to manifest or just feel peace in general, what you want to be focusing on is raising your state of consciousness to the 5D. Raising your state of consciousness to just being here now. And what you'll experience is that things become less heavy, things become less dense, and your life will start to happen in a much easier way. So that's all I have for you today. If you like this video, make sure you hit that like button so more people can see this kind of content and start to ascend to the 5D, if you want to call it that, which is once again just a word to represent raising your state of consciousness. And I'm trying to articulate it in the most practical and efficient way for you to understand. So if this video helped you to understand these concepts in a much more simple way, then make sure you hit that like button, because it helps me grow, it helps the channel grow, and it'll also help more people actually see this kind of content. Also, I wanted to announce that I have a free guided meditation that's specifically designed to help you connect deeper to the present moment and essentially get to the 5D state of consciousness, where it just means you're more present to the moment. And so it's completely free. You can try it out by hitting the link that's in the description box of this video. I'll also leave it as a comment in this video. So that's all I have for you today. Have yourself a great day, and see you in the next video.